r/Nosleep. Posted by u/Twister_22. The radio game. When I was younger, my father was an archaeologist. At least that's what he'd have you think. Although, with him being constantly gone and drifting in and out of my life, I'd call him a deadbeat. Now that's not to say I wasn't taken care of. His constant expeditions garnered more than their fair share of money. I just wished he was home more often. Most of what he found out exploring the world he sold for a hefty profit, but sometimes he'd keep a souvenir or two. He'd keep them under heavy lock and key in his study. I was never allowed into my father's study. He said it wasn't any place for a child, barely a place for a man. One day, after a long stretch of boredom, I found myself wandering the house and came upon the huge oak doors leading to the inner sanctum of my father's study. I was surprised to find that the door had been left ajar. Like my father was in a hurry to get somewhere. Being the curious child I was, I took this opportunity to venture into the one room in our house I had never so much as seen the inside of. Upon opening the door, I found that it led to a hallway, very dimly lit with candles resting on the walls. They illuminated oil paintings of people I had never seen before. White men dressed in colonial attire raising flags of countries I didn't recognize. They were resting atop what looked to be horses, but they had too many legs and eyes. The fur was too long and they were much larger than normal horses too. Next were the landscapes. The paintings depicted a huge city about a half a second after a nuclear bomb had been dropped. The detail was so realistic, it was as if the buildings and even the people were being evaporated in real time. I could almost feel the heat of the explosion coming off the painting itself. Once I finally made it into the actual study, I was taken aback by how huge it actually was inside. There were glass sculptures that reflected much more light than usual. Skeletal remains of animals I had never seen. With anatomy that didn't even make sense. All manner of artifacts and ancestral ruins scattered about the room. It took me a while of scanning to finally find my father's desk. I made my way over to it and started poking around his things. I found mostly stuff about his past digs and discoveries and more about potential buyers. It was odd though, when I started reading things dated into the future. About discoveries he had yet to even make. "Oh, you're a new face, aren't you?" A staticky voice came out from behind me. I jumped back, planting myself into the leather recliner, and turned to see a small radio resting on a table just behind where I had been snooping. "Oh haha, did I frighten you?" The voice came through the rough static again. "Wha? Who are you? How are you talking to me through that?" I asked in a shaky voice. Now, don't you have more important questions you need answers to? Like, where did your father procure all these, shall we say, abnormalities?" The voice said, finally cutting through the heavy static and coming out crisp and clean. Almost like a man was standing right in front of me, speaking clear as day. "I guess," I said, easing into the chair a bit more. Hearing the man's voice clearly seemed to calm me down a bit. It was a smooth voice in a very posh English accent. "Well, now that's the spirit. Just as inquisitive as your dear father. A real chip of the old block, I say." The man's voice grew excited. I could hear his smile through the words he spoke. "Well, if you want answers, I've got them in spades. However, they are not for the poor. You'll need to pay a hefty price for my words of wisdom." "I don't have any money," I said. "Well, lucky for you, money isn't at all what I'm after. No, not at all. What I am after is the same as you, information. Simple knowledge. What could I know that could possibly interest you? Or anyone for that matter? Now don't go putting yourself down, lad. You may have more to offer than you realize," the man said. "Now this is how it works. You ask me a question and I'll answer truthfully and in as much detail as requested. After I have answered, then it is your turn to answer one of my questions, again, in as much detail as I ask for. However, if you tell me anything short of the truth, I'll be forced to do the same for the rest of our little conversation. The one handicap I can extend to you is that you can get away with telling one lie at any time and I won't hold it against you, but I also get one lie. Does that sound fair?" "Sure, I guess," I said. To me the game seemed simple enough. Just tell the truth and he would too. I'm sure his questions aren't going to be hard ones and I really would like to know more about my father's exploits. It seemed like this weird voice in the radio had what I needed. "Well, alright then, lad. You can ask the first question." The joviality in his voice was a bit off-putting. It seemed like he was all too eager to start the game. Like he knew something I didn't. "I guess I should ask your name first," I said. "Ah, a practical one, I see. You may call me Matthew. As for my question, I shall ask the same of you." "My name's Jessup." Alright, so how do you know my father? I asked. Right down to the nitty-gritty. Well, to put it bluntly, he found me, just like the other exhibits you see scattered about the room, Matthew said flatly. I was getting the impression he didn't like the other exhibits. No, maybe he thought he was above them. Do you think your father loves you, Jessup? Matthew asked. I'm his son, of course he does, I said. A bit taken aback by the question. Do you think he doesn't? I blurted out without thinking. No, my boy. I'm sure he does not, Matthew said quickly back. What? How can why I stopped myself before I could finish. The handicap to the game was that we both could tell a lie once. This had to be a lie. There's no way he was telling the truth about my father. That means the rest of what he says must be the flat-out truth. But I had to test my theory somehow. Did you lie about my father not loving me? I asked. No, lad. I wasn't lying, he said. So I had two theories before me. Either he had been telling the truth this whole time or he had just used up his one lie trying to deceive me. He could not have lied twice, so I'm guessing he was actually lying now. Matthew must have somehow noticed that I was thinking hard. Look, lad, I've played this game with more people than I can count. My advice is to not overthink it and just ask and answer as best you can, Matthew said. Now, lad, what did you dream about last night? I had to think for a moment before remembering. I don't usually have dreams, and when I do I can almost never remember them. However, the one I had last night, well, suffice to say I wasn't going to forget it anytime soon. I was in my mom's lap on a bus headed to our favorite museum. I always begged her to take me there when she and I spent time together. I remember looking up at her smiling face and she kissed me on my forehead. Then, all of a sudden the bus got real bumpy and my mom held on to me tight. Then I felt weightless. Like we were flying. Then a loud crash, the sound of 1,000 windows breaking at once, and the smell of iron. I could still feel the grip my mother had on me well after the sirens came and they dragged me out of the wreck. The last thing I saw was my father clawing past first responders trying to get to the wreck, wailing and screaming all the while. I could feel the hot tears brimming on my eyes as I recalled the nightmare. I could feel my chest tighten and my breath quicken. I had to remember what I was taught in these situations. Just breathe. Focus on your breathing, Jessup. Where are you really? I asked, still in a panic. Well, can't you see me with your own eyes? I'm right here before you in this very room. I am in essence this very radio. Nothing more and nothing less, Matthew stated. Was your mother's death your fault, Jessup? Matthew asked. Of course not, I yelled back. I could see a faint figure appear out behind the radio. The slightest silhouette of a man, just beyond what my sense of sight could make out. Ha, no need to get all riled up, lad. It's just a harmless question. Matthew jested. I could almost make out a faint smile on the figure behind the radio. Why would you ask something so ridiculous? I barked back. Well, your father does. That's why he doesn't love you, Matthew said. That's a lie. My father does love me, I yelled. I could see the figure growing more clear and material as the conversation went on. Is that why he's never around, lad? Because he loves you so much? Matthew said in a condescending tone. That's not it. He's only gone because his work is always calling him. He has too much on his plate. I wasn't about to believe his lies. Ah, I see. So his work is more important than his only son? The way I see it, you're just a reminder of the love he lost protecting you. Matthew quipped back. All the while the figure in the back looked almost as real as any other person. His features were no longer obscured by immaterial mist and transparency. He was a tall white man with a huge mustache. Dressed in the same colonial getup I saw in those paintings in the hallway. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man. He looked down on me with that same smirk I had felt he had from the very beginning. Your WR, I was cut off by a hand clasping my mouth shut tight. I could see the amusement and pride fall from his eyes as he glared just over my shoulder. Then he began to fade away. You should really keep the door locked, Jeffrey, Matthew said before fading away entirely. The room was filled with soft static once more and I could feel the tight hand over my mouth loosen. I turned around and saw my father. He looked frightened and was breathing heavily. Dad, who was that? I asked. I'm sorry, son, I slipped up. In all these years I have always bested him, but I made a mistake and he got to me. I put you in danger and I promise I won't ever again. My father pulled me in for a deep hug and I could feel his tears falling onto the back of my neck. I love you, Jessup,